You may have felt the earth move beneath you at some point in your waking journey, either following a profound spiritual epiphany or the subtle shattering of a personal identity. Things that were once commonplace now seem strange. The world's ear-piercing din faded away as you peered past the illusion's curtain to reveal your pattern's mechanized workings. Like emerging from a building on fire into fresh air, the first experience of being silent was a precious and liberating one. But significance faded away gradually, almost imperceptibly, as if your spirit had turned out life's lights and then forgotten to put them back on. It wasn't a disaster, but a silent departure. You gave up trying. You ceased performing not because you were hopeless, but because you had reached a state of sacred fatigue, a void that was both curiously tranquil and unsettlingly quiet. Then the thought started to creep in, a low, hurtful one. Why am I so empty now that I know the truth? Here we have the dilemma that no one ever tells you about. We are made to think that when we awaken spiritually, our purpose will be ignited and our clarity will blaze brighter than ever before. However, it has a different effect on many people, particularly those who are sensitive, seekers, empaths, or who are traveling inward. It totally drains the tank. It sifts through all ill-conceived goals until not even desire remains. And in that nothingness, we conflate awakening with indifference. My great buddy, who is highly intelligent, spiritually connected, and well-versed in the works of Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, and Krishnamurti, was recently the subject of a chat with me. After a deep introspection, she came out with brilliant clarity. 2 months after she informed me, she could see through the facades of self-esteem, success, and outward affection. I discovered her in bed, gazing up at the ceiling, lost in an unexpected silence. I used to be very self-conscious about not taking action, she admitted. I am now unconcerned with the outcome of my actions. I felt extinguished, Carl Jung said at this exact moment, after having imagined that enlightenment would light me on fire. He said it was a hallowed place where the ego gives way to the self, a transitional region where the calm terror of not knowing what to do with one's motivation wanes as one's persona and the approval of others fade away, leaving behind nothing but the unformed clay. Nothing wrong with this. It's the chrysalis stage of individuation, when a mind goes through a metamorphosis from caterpillar to butterfly. It is the mental and emotional demise necessary for a new beginning. However, we must not mistake this absence for a setback. Rather, it contains a subtle stirring of inner truth that longs to be acknowledged, an impulse to exist and take action driven not by the desire for external validation, but by a sense of inner harmony. This piece isn't about moping around. Rather, it's about that eerie period just after waking up, when all the old fuel dies and all the fresh energy is still taking shape. Being one's authentic self is a privilege that Jung saw as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The sacred beginning of life occurs when motivation is lost, not at the end. Long before it became a topic of discussion in contemporary spiritual circles, analytical psychologist Carl Jung anticipated the weird and quiet fog that descends upon awakening, not as a mask, but as a soul. On the subject of the soul's journey into its own depths, he talked with sharp clarity, avoiding mysticism and euphoria. Jung said that once the unconscious starts to stir, the path to enlightenment is not by visualizing luminous forms, but through bringing the unconscious into consciousness. Those phrases may be beautiful on the surface, but they conceal a horrible reality. Awakening does not bring joy, but rather deprivation. The false self's framework is blown apart by it. As a result, the person you thought you were would slowly and sacredly die. There is a widespread internal collapse. Everything that formerly drove you, aspiration, success, and admiration, starts to go away. In the light of a more profound reality, the timetables you adhered to, the objectives that formerly motivated you, and even the identity structures that characterize your relationships, job, and daily routine start to dissipate like mirages. Your ego does not vanish. It does not die. This is an important psychological subtlety to keep in mind. It just gets confused. A new script has not yet materialized, despite the fact that the old one has been burned. A profound spiritual limbo, rather than sloth or indifference, is the outcome. Even though you're no longer asleep, you still aren't completely alert to what's coming up. This is the enigmatic blackening phase of alchemy, or what Jung termed the nigredo, when the ego is deconstructed but the self is not yet king. What appears to be demotivation in today's parlance is actually a sacred stop, an in-between place where the soul turns inward to rewrite its story, according to Jungian terminology. Our culture is afraid of being silent. Modern society, Jung said, does all it can to sidestep this stage by pathologizing, numbing, and medicating it. After all, it can't fathom a change that doesn't appear to be progress. Your current state, however, is one of initiation, not regression. Sacred descent, not dysfunction, is the correct term. Even though it shares some symptoms with clinical depression, this is not that. Jung thought that the first step toward individuation, the holy emergence of the authentic self, was the soul's refusal to take part in a life with which it no longer resonated. Do you know that this is the part that nobody ever talks about? A pain that follows illumination, a hush that follows discovery. The stillness, though, is instructive, not void. What appears like demotivation may actually be the start of a deeper alignment, if you can learn to be still inside it and listen to what it requires of you. Even while everyone around you thinks you're lost, Jung would argue that something a lot more genuine is actually reforming you. And that's going to be the subject of our next investigation. If you've been lost in the fog of rebirth, gazing into the quiet where your fire previously burned, then you should know. You are not damaged. Rather, you are experiencing a profound psychological change for which our society has no adequate terminology. An inner world architectural reconfigurement that goes beyond just challenging your thoughts. It's transformational. All of your once inspiring aspirations, plans, deadlines, goals, 5-year visions, and motivational mantras about hustle suddenly seem like pipe dreams. Not because you were unsuccessful, but because your motivation is crumbling from the inside out. This unraveling had already started before there were any whispers about it on the internet. Let us get this straight. You derive the majority of your strength from the persona, the manufactured self, the mask you use to navigate the world. Being someone who craves praise and admiration was not a defect, but an essential part of growing up. According to Jung, the persona is a system of behavior which is imposed upon the individual by the expectations of society. However, after awakening, one starts to perceive the mask for what it really is, a performance. You're no longer compelled by the performance. Once you realize the stage is an illusion, chasing applause becomes futile. So what happened? The aspirations you formerly held in high regard now seem alien. Like an actor who steps off stage and forgets their lines. Not because they're confused, but because the script no longer speaks to the soul. The eerie quiet within you is caused by these words, which were penned by a self that no longer resides in you. Not because you've lost your way, but because you no longer identify with a certain place to go, you may feel lost and directionless. You never lost your drive. What happened was that you outgrew the things that gave it power. Instead of emptiness, what you feel inside is a sacred pause, a vacant space waiting to be filled with something more genuine, something made from presence rather than performance. It was the ego that pushed, not the soul. While we wait, a sacred thing starts to take shape. According to Carl Jung, one should not strive to elevate their ego, but rather to include it into a more profound and expansive psychological whole. We are not here to fulfill the ego's wishes, but rather to help it become more refined, temperate, and in harmony with the self, the ultimate essence that links us to everything. This process, which he dubbed individuation, is a lifetime quest to overcome discord and find harmony inside. Becoming the self that is real is more important than becoming the self that is admired. The self, in contrast to the ego, cares nothing about getting a good grade or looking well. Alignment, not ambition, is the driving force. Telling the truth is its sole purpose. Thus, a holy recalibration of the mind begins upon a spiritual awakening. What was once thrilling now feels lifeless. Everything that seems forced, fake, or unnatural to your system will eventually be rejected. Anything you created out of your previous self's insecurities about being enough, whether it's a job path, a relationship, or simply a vision board, falls into this category. Experiencing both liberty and bewilderment is a common experience during this inner cleansing. What replaces the flaws that you're letting go of? Jung warned that this is a trap for many. Some people, upon awakening, mistakenly believe that they can escape via spiritual bypassing. They suspend disbelief, pretend everything is an illusion, and tell themselves life is meaningless. Still, distancing oneself is different from detachment. Instead of wanting you to vanish from existence, the self would rather live in the world via you. It would rather take flesh than flee. It is not looking to retreat, but to be fully realized. Jung did a good job describing the threshold that exists before that embodiment, but few people really notice it when they're in it. It is the emptiness that follows waking up, the space that brings confusion rather than joy. Neither is it poetic or trendy. It appears to be sitting silently as time flies by, unable to articulate your own transformation. Jung would say, "You are not failing, you are in between. You have stepped out of the ego, but the self has not yet become your foundation." This liminal space is not a mistake. It is initiation, a descent into the unknown that modern culture has no patience for. Stillness is misdiagnosed as laziness. Pause is confused for paralysis. So you begin to judge yourself, and that judgment becomes the very wall that blocks the energy your soul is calling home. This phase is sacred. It is chrysalis, not collapse. And if you can stay here long enough, if you can resist the urge to rush or retreat, you will begin to feel it, the quiet pulse of something deeper rising. The self is not loud, but it is constant, and it is waiting for you to trust what cannot yet be named. Carl Jung had a word for this sacred reversal of energy. In antiadromia, the phenomenon where something, when taken to its extreme, transforms into its opposite. And nowhere is this more evident than in the aftermath of awakening. You move from the manic striving of ego, "I must do everything," to the hollow stillness of soul. Why do anything at all? The pendulum swings not because you're broken, but because balance demands it. The psyche, long imprisoned in performance, finally collapses into rest, and this descent is not pathology. It is initiation. In the language of myth, this is the archetype of the hermit, the withdrawal from the world before rebirth. It is the sacred cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness, no longer a crawling self, not yet a flying one. It is the goof phase, unstructured, undefined, unproductive by every modern standard, but necessary because the psyche is undergoing alchemical transformation. And transformation, Jung would say, begins in darkness, not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in descent. This is where modern spirituality often loses its depth, by glamorizing awakening while avoiding its crucifixion. Jung insisted that the shadow, the rejected, uncomfortable, unconscious parts of ourselves, is not something to escape, but something to integrate. Shadow work is not advanced level spirituality. It is the very foundation of becoming whole. In this empty space you found yourself in, your unconscious is rising, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. All the things you've buried deep down, like anger, sadness, and unfulfilled needs, are starting to come to the surface. Your ego wants everything to be clear and actionable, like a name tag, but your true self is nudging you to let go. What I am creating is more profound. And here is where the true labor starts. Not with success, but with giving in, not with understanding, but with being a witness. The mind isn't broken. It's processing years of distraction, deceit, and false effort. It cuts off your motivation, ambition, and hunger, forcing you to face what you've buried. It's in that silent, haunting space that you start to remember. Subtly but surely, a change occurs. A fresh drive emerges, unlike the previous one. It is not fueled by fear. It is not time-sensitive or dramatic. Instead, it hums, a soul-driven urge to act, not because you're obligated to, but because it would be dishonest not to. Jung referred to this as the emergence of the self, which is not an ideal, but an internal compass that does not pursue, but rather calls you toward wholeness, rather than success. So you have entered the stillness, tasted stillness, not as stagnation, but as a sacred pause, and stood in silence. As you make your way into the inner blackness where neither voice nor light can be seen, an old force starts to awaken within you, not in the form of a rumble nor a flash of lightning, but as a gentle, peaceful pulse that does not demand your return to the past, but rather your creation of something that does not yet exist. Once the ego is honored and the unconscious is respected, life stops being a game of survival and becomes an unfolding of meaning. This is the first whisper of the self, not in language, but in feeling, pull, presence. Carl Jung called this the symbolic life, a life no longer governed by ego or convention, but guided by the deeper forces of the soul. The paradox is that when you follow your inner guidance, it may appear remarkably ordinary. You are no longer rushed. Instead, you're motivated by the quiet certainty of inner alignment rather than FOMO. You quit seeking clarity as an end goal and start appreciating it when it comes, often disguised in simplicity. Living authentically doesn't guarantee you'll always be full of energy and certainty. Fatigue, doubt, and grief are still a part of being human. But what goes away is the dull weariness of pretending to be someone you're not. Instead, something changes. You start making art when no one is looking, refusing to say yes when everyone else is, and following wonder instead of checking boxes. You begin choosing peace over performance. This is not inertia. It's a new fuel, not adrenaline but alignment, not pressure but presence. Called this living symbolically, not as an escape in a fantasy, but as a return to soul. You begin to trust the language of dreams, gut instincts, symbols, and synchronicities. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a monologue shouted into the void, but a conversation with the unseen. And what does that look like? Sometimes it's as subtle as different questions. Not what should I do, but what is quietly calling me. Not what's the plan, but where is life nudging me. Not how can I prove myself, but what feels true. You stop trying to dominate life and start participating with it. Ambition doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes devotion to what is real, what is true, what brings you alive. And strangely, that devotion moves mountains. It gets things done, but from wholeness, not depletion. Now it is sustainable. Now it is soul-powered. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. And it leads you, often without effort, to create, to teach, to heal, to serve. Not because you should, but because your whole being says yes. So if you've been wondering where your spark went after awakening, remember it's not gone. The old fire burned away, so a deeper flame could emerge, one that won't flicker in the storms of the world. Jung never promised ease, but he did promise depth. If you're here reading this, then you're already walking the path. This is not the end of your awakening. It is the beginning of your becoming. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul, and the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know. Fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home, and from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.